Welcome to the Ecommerce Marketing Podcast, the highly rated digital marketing podcast that provides weekly digital marketing tips and strategies from some of the world's top digital marketers and e-commerce entrepreneurs that will help you take your digital marketing to the next level. Sit back and enjoy this power-packed episode hosted by Arlen Robinson, who is an e-commerce entrepreneur and digital marketing expert with over 20 years of experience. Hey, e-commerce marketing podcast listener. Are you looking to increase traffic and sales to your website? You can do this by launching your own affiliate program. Just visit getosi.com and sign up for a free trial today. That's getosi.com. Now get ready to hear from your e-commerce marketing expert of the week as they drill down to give you details on marketing strategies that can help grow your business.
Welcome back to the E-commerce Marketing Podcast, everyone. My name is Arlen, and I am your host. And today we've got a very special guest, Mischa Zvegintzov, who is a seasoned sales expert who once retired to teach yoga and be a stay-at-home dad. Now he's the founder of the Influence Army and host of the Table Rush talk show. He helps heart-centered entrepreneurs amplify their message and build influence without costly advertising. Are you ready to go on an influence tour? Welcome to the podcast, Mischa.
Hey, thank you so much, Arlen. I'm super excited to be here. I love the work you do, and what a great podcast, and you're committed to it, dedicated to it, so super honored to be here.
Gotcha. Thank you, Mischa. I appreciate that. And I'm super excited to talk to you today. As we were talking before, I think we have a lot in common, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit later. So, definitely like to talk to you more. But, today, I think it's a great subject because although this is a podcast that I'm on and you have your own podcast as well, we've talked about, this is probably about the 300 and I would say 43rd episode of the E-commerce Marketing Podcast, believe it or not. And so we've only talked about podcasting a few times, and this is going to be one of those times. That's why I'm excited to talk about it. So our topic today is going to be using podcast guest speaking, as a tool to build your e-commerce business. And that's really the topic of our conversation. You're definitely an expert in that because you have your own podcast and you've been in the trenches with various e-commerce ventures for quite some time. So you've seen, all of the ins and outs of it from that side of things. And so, before we dive into the subject of podcasting, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your background and, specifically how you got into what you're doing today?
Such a great question, and I'll try to keep it short, but ultimately, for 20 years of my life, I was in sales, and I started out telemarketing, so I probably literally have made 1 million hand-dialed phone calls, where you used to have to hand-dial the phone call, to hand-dial the phone. And then I got auto dialers, that did the dialing for you. I've done door-to-door sales in B2B door-to-door sales, literally walking from company to company. I've sent out massive flyer campaigns. To me, what are massive, so sending out 5,000-10,000 mailers a week to get the phone to ring. So the bulk of my work history was in sales. And in about 2000, in mortgages, and the bulk of it was mortgages. So I was a home loan officer, did tech sales for a number of years, found my success 15 years as a loan officer and telemarketing and building teams and getting the phone to ring and really finding the data to find the people to be our customers. Like that's right. A lot of it. So finding those key databases that you could mine so that you could telemarket to them or send out mailers again. Sort of burned out, went through a divorce. Both my parents died. All this chaos happened in 2012, 13, 14. And fortunately, I had a little bit of money in the bank and I retired out of the business. I'll never forget the day I quit and retired. I went into my boss and I said, "Hey, I'm done. I'm leaving." And he said to me, we'll match whatever offer you have out there. And I said, "No, you don't understand. I'm quitting the business. I got to get my boys through high school." through grade
Right.
school and high school or whatever those years were. And he looked at me straight up and said, "Man, I wish I could quit too." Such a funny day.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
yeah. So, I taught yoga for a number of years, and really it was great. It just was such a great outlet for me and allowed me to, express myself and be productive while I was really focusing on getting my boys, like I said, through school, through high school as a single dad. And somewhere along the line, when my one son moved out and my other one was a senior and getting ready to do his own thing, he's like, "Dad, like, you don't need to babysit me anymore." In effect, he's like, "I've got my girlfriend, I've got my job, I'm a
Right.
senior, like, do your thing, right? Go do your thing."
Right.
And intuitively, I knew that when my boys were moving out or getting ready to move on to the next thing, that I would jump back into the entrepreneurial space. And
Okay.
and for me, it was online marketing. Just fascinated by it. Right, I was more old school, direct
Mhm.
mail, telemarketing, door to door, and I was like, I want to conquer this online marketing space. And as you told me before we jumped on the podcast here, you've been in this space for a long time,
Yep.
and it's easier said than done. Yes.
Mhm. For sure. Yeah, I can definitely testify to that fact. The online space, a lot of times people that are familiar with, direct sales or, have a brick and mortar establishment, when they look at e-commerce businesses, it's like, oh, okay, you got an online store, you just throw up a website, you're selling products, you're sitting back drinking coffee, you're clocking out at 4 p.m. There's nothing further from the truth, I think, with it. There's
Nothing
a
for
lot that goes into
Yes,
it.
yes, right. And I think people have this vision of everybody
Yeah.
sitting on their boat in the Bahamas, right? Like working for
Right.
an hour and really just
Yeah.
trying to figure out where to stack all the money that they're
Yeah.
collecting. And
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly. We wish it was that easy, but yeah,
we wish it was that easy.
unfortunately, it isn't. Well, yeah, thank you for sharing your background in that story. I appreciate that. It sounds like you've kind of you were your past has really shaped your ability to be successful in the online space because you've sold in so many different avenues. You mentioned direct, door to door, telemarketing, you name it, you've kind of done it. And I think that really can help when you're in the online space because, even though, well, like we said, it's definitely difficult to sell online and it's definitely difficult to become successful. But when it comes to selling, there are some core fundamentals that I think are present no matter where you're selling. There's some things that you have to kind of stick by regardless of the platform. So it's good to know that that's carried through with what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I'll add to that and say things that I was very strong at back in the old, door to door telemarketing was scripting, scripts, like literally
Yes.
write out what you're going to say when you're going to say it. And that translates into what are the emails that I'm sending in the online space, right?
Yeah.
The systems of follow up, follow up, follow up. That's half the battle in sales. A lot of people don't buy on the first click. You got to have your
Mhm.
systems in line to follow up, follow up, follow up, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
what else? Just all that stuff. Where to find leads, all these
Mhm.
kinds of things. So I basically bring the old school into the new, is what I like
Yeah.
to say. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Good.
And,
Good.
of
Good.
course, what's that?
It's good to know. Yeah,
Y-
it's good to know that those old school principles are definitely relevant today.
ap- Oh, yeah, go ahead. I was going to add something too, really quick, and just to
Mhm.
cut to the chase. So I of course, went all in, jumped into Russell Brunson's, programs, jumped into his mastermind, $25,000 a year. It's called the 2CCX. And so I didn't just dabble when I decided to re-enter the working world, shall we call it. I just went all in, and I've
Mhm.
learned so much from Russell and that whole uh, uh, ecosystem. But what happened was, is I started getting video testimonials for people,
Yeah.
and because so much of online, what we do is you need to have that social proof, that customer validation, testimonials, case studies, uh, UGC, user generated content, in the e-commerce space, right? Anytime you can get some user generated content where your customer is using that rug that you sell online or whatever it is, and they're like, this thing changed my life, it reminds me of my parents, or whatever it is, right?
Mhm.
Like getting that rich content. And I love doing that. I literally got paid to fly all around the world to interview entrepreneurs, to interview customers, to get people's stories, in effect. And I
Mhm.
started learning that a lot of people are not good at telling their stories, or really a lot of entrepreneurs are not good at telling their customer stories. And we should be
Yeah.
doing that as entrepreneurs. Even if we're in e-commerce, we need to be learning how to tell our customer stories, right?
Hey there, fellow entrepreneurs and B2B marketers. Before we dive back into the conversation, let me introduce you to a game changer in the lead generation arena, Lead Feeder. Now, we all know the struggle of identifying those elusive website visitors and turning them into valuable leads. But what if I told you there's a tool that not only promises but delivers on supercharging your lead generation and sales efforts? Enter Lead Feeder. Imagine having the power to identify companies visiting your website, track their behavior in real time, and seamlessly integrate it all with your CRM. Lead Feeder is not just a tool, it's your secret weapon for efficient and targeted lead engagement. What sets Lead Feeder apart? It's the ability to provide detailed insights into customer behavior, helping your sales team prioritize efforts and close deals faster. With customizable notifications, lead scoring, and GDPR compliance, Leadfeeder is changing the game. Ready to revolutionize your approach to leads and deals? Head over to leadfeeder.com for your free demo today. That's LEADFEEDER.com. Don't miss out on the future of successful lead generation with Leadfeeder. Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, and that's kind of leads us into our whole topic of discussion, which is podcasting, because obviously, as an e-commerce entrepreneur, if you're a guest on a podcast, a lot of what you're going to be doing is telling your story, how you got to where you are, how your products got to where they are today, how you got to where you are today, and how maybe successful customers of yours have evolved by using your products. And so I think where I kind of want to start off is something that was relevant personally to me, and I know it's probably relevant to a lot of other e-commerce entrepreneurs. So, my background is engineering. I was a computer systems engineer, and so I kind of, my personality is skewed more towards introvert, and so I'm naturally, when I was growing up, I was super shy. I was a super shy kid. I didn't, do a lot of talking. Kind of kept to myself. Wasn't outgoing. And although I've kind of come out of that to an extent, I still have those characteristics by nature. That's just my personality. I'm not one to quickly go up to someone. And so when you're thinking about podcasting, and when other entrepreneurs are thinking about, okay, getting on a podcast, if you're an introvert and more, naturally have those characteristics, what would you say would be some tactics for those that are more introverted, for them to be successful as a guest on podcasts? What would you say would be some good tips?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I've got some tips that I will give. And I will just say, I come across as a very outgoing person. People say, oh, you've got this great energy, warm, all this stuff. A lot of
Mhm.
that is a learned skill,
Okay.
right? I think people think that you said it. You're like, I'm an engineer. Took me a time to get to the point where now I'm comfortable on my podcast, do the stuff, put my stuff out there, right? Put yourself out there. So it can be a learned skill. I
Yep.
used to cry when I was young in high school, not high school, in grade school. I was so horrified to get in front of class. The teachers would call me up and I'd be crying. And one time a teacher even called me out. It was horrifying. She said, I'd call on Mischa, but when he comes up here, he'll probably start crying.
Oh,
Right.
wow.
I know, so heavy, right? And she brought me up there and I started
Yeah.
crying. And I don't know, I just, that's a horrifying spot. But
Mhm.
fast forward to today, it's easy for me. I can jump in front of the camera any day, anytime, but it is a learned skill. And so I would use that as encouragement for any of your audience that feels introverted and like, how could I ever put myself out there consistently? Because that's the problem.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's easy to do it once, or not easy. We'll do it once, but never again, right? And
Yeah.
and so it can be learned. And I've got what I call my show up as your best you blueprint. And this is my 3-step blueprint for instantly captivating any audience with unforgettable authenticity and magnetism, even if you're an introvert or have introvert tendencies. And like I said, this is a learned skill for me. Um, what are my? So we want to have physical preparation. Step one is physical preparation. And so
Mhm.
when I was doing all my telemarketing, and again, I've made millions of phone calls. My mentors, like Zig Ziglar, and I don't know if that name rings a bell for you, Zig Ziglar, Brian Tracy, they would tell us things like smile when you're on the phone, smile.
Mhm.
And it creates that natural energy, right? Sit up straight, roll your shoulders back. So that's physical presentation. So I literally have those skills built where when I'm getting ready to jump on the podcast with you, I grab my chair that forces me to sit up straight. I roll my shoulders back, and you'll probably see anybody watching this that I'm smiling a lot,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
You're just creating that energy. And you can hear a smile. And there's studies out there. I don't want to go too deep down the rabbit hole, but a smile changes your physiology. People can hear it. Obviously, they can see it. But when you're smiling and someone's listened to a podcast, you present better, more naturally. And so I would say if you're an introvert and you're like, I never smile and I hate smiling, well, maybe you don't frown as much, right? Simple as that.
Right.
Just level it up just a
Exactly.
little. That's all we're
Yep.
asking. I
Yep.
told you sit up straight, roll your shoulders back. And you can also stand up. A lot of people stand up. I don't know if maybe some of the people that come on your podcast are standing when they're on the podcast. So that
Yeah.
naturally opens up your diaphragm and you're more expansive, right?
Mhm.
Um, then the step 2 is emotional engagement. So how do we come across emotionally in how do we want to say it? I like to call it 7 excitement. And there's this lady um, her name's McCall Jones, and I'd had an opportunity to be coached by her and be on a couple of her calls, but she spoke on big stages in front of thousands and thousands of people. And she said, basically, what you want to do is get to that 7 level of excitement for you. And she said, we don't want to be the 10 excitement, which is like you're over the top and for who you normally are, right?
Right.
So she says, hey, there's tricks to get that 7 excitement. And again, it's for you. So for me, she says, hey, come up with a story or come up with a memory that's of a 7 level excitement. I've got 2 boys, right?
Mhm.
When those boys were born, those were like the biggest days of my life. Very exciting. That's over
Yeah.
the top. That's too much,
Yes.
right? Maybe
Right.
the
Right.
day if you're married and your wife said yes when you asked her to marry you, like that's a 10 day, right? You're
Yes.
that right. But how about when I first was trying to guest speak on podcasts and I had some hosts say yes? And I can remember that. I can remember actually the first time I did this virtual summit where, have you familiar with virtual summits at all?
Mhm. Oh yeah.
Awesome. So I did a virtual summit, and there's a gentleman named Anthony Trucks he was the A-list guy that I wanted to get on this virtual summit and have him speak. And I remember I sent the email to him, and he responded back pretty quickly and said yes. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is real. This is happening. There's power in what I'm doing here. And
Mhm.
so before I jump on the podcast with you, I can retell that story to myself and be like, "Oh yeah, I remember when I was nervous about doing my summit, and so I started sending out emails, and I sent that email out to Anthony Trucks, and I'll never forget when that email came in, man, and he said,
Right.
"Yes,
Right.
I'll be a speaker." Right? Can you feel that passion in me? that's
Right.
kind of, and it's like authentic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So get that 7, think of that story or two that you can tell yourself before you jump on a show or do your Facebook Live or however it is that you're putting yourself out there. I do this stuff naturally now, but
Mm-hmm.
you can build that habit. And then lastly, step 3 is I like to get spiritually centered. And it might
Mm-hmm.
sound a little woo-woo, but I like to say a prayer or a mantra
Mm-hmm.
before I jump on a show or do something like this. And for me, it's how can I be of service? How can I serve Arlen's audience? And so I, I'm praying for that. Hey God, how can I be of service here? What can I bring to the table? And try and let go of that ego and those ego barriers. And I
Mm-hmm.
found that serves me a lot. And I learned that along the way. And I have I'll never forget. It's like page 1. One of the books I have is like page 120, and I have it dog-eared, where it basically said you can go anywhere and do anything as long as you're spiritually in the right mindset. And
Mm-hmm.
I was like, yep, I love that. So those are some tricks that any introverts that are listening can do. And
Yeah.
I'll end with this in regards to that question, is that you don't have to be anyone you're not.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're not trying to be anyone we're not. We're just trying to show up as our best selves, which is kind of cliche these days, but it's
Mm-hmm.
true. But if you're a moody introvert that likes to wear hoodies and wear sunglasses and frown, show up as that best person. You know what I mean?
Right.
And
Right. Right.
and what's beautiful about that is there's somebody in the audience that's going to resonate with that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah, those are some awesome tips. Specifically that last one and the previous one when you talked about getting to that or thinking about that 7th level of excitement caused by an experience that you've had. Because I understand what you're saying. You want to come off being enthusiastic, happy, and how do you trigger that, naturally without going, over the top? Because I've been places and I've seen speakers that are just like, it's like the shot out of a cannon, and that's too much. You have to. The number 7, I think, is a good number because that gives you kind of a visualization of, okay, I can think about this experience where, like you said, it wasn't the birth of a child, it wasn't the wedding day. Those are the level 10 and above, but it was something where you truly had some joy, and it was something that you can kind of pull from when you're going on to these shows as a way to I guess, like you said, internal motivation. So yeah, I think that's really awesome. Now, I know, Mischa, you've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs. You've already talked about some things that you've done yourself personally, but are there any specific real life case studies of any entrepreneurs that may have been on the introverted side that have gone on doing podcasts that have been successful? And there's certain things that they've done to be able to do that and be successful on a guest speaking on podcasts?
Yeah, such a great question. And you know, so there's some big names out there that are self-proclaimed introverts that we
Okay.
might doubt that because they're so prevalent, or they're very they put themselves out there now. But there's a
Hmm.
gentleman named, I'm going to just throw some names out there of
Sure.
self-proclaimed introverts that people might know, right? And these aren't necessarily people that I've worked with or coached
Right.
or anything like that, but these are where you can go, oh my gosh. So there's a gentleman named Tristan Walker, and
Hmm.
he's the introvert, his words not mine, the introvert entrepreneur behind Walker and Company brands and the creator of Bevel. It's a
Okay.
product line
Yeah.
that caters to people of color.
Hmm.
um,
Familiar with that.
yeah, so Tristan, he ended up being the CEO of Procter and Gamble, and then also he's like on the board of Foot Locker today, right? On the board of the board of directors of all these crazy companies that we would know, that I think are
Hmm.
crazy. I'm like, wow, you're on the board of directors of Foot Locker. But
Right.
my point is, if you go to, there's a tool called Listen Notes, and you can search for people who have spoken on podcasts.
Hmm.
Okay. And so if you go to listen notes and put in quote, Tristan Walker, or make sure to put quote who it is, end quote. So that way it makes sure to search for that complete name.
Yeah.
I'll leave out the technical details of why you need to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll see that Tristan Walker is on podcasts all over the place, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like hundreds and hundreds of podcasts, and has been for years, right? So, and he's like, hey man, I'm an introvert and it's all right
Mm-hmm.
though. I'll do it. So he's a gentleman. There's
Okay.
there's a couple guys that I love, that they have this company called Fire Creek Snacks.
Mm-hmm.
And which is we'd consider that an e-com product, right? Like beef jerky
Yeah.
sticks in effect,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so yeah, so these guys have such a great story. And you know, in the e-commerce space, when I think of e-commerce, I'm thinking of I mean, there's a couple of levels of e-commerce. There's like commoditized products, I don't know, paper cups or paper clips or whatever, where it's hard to build a story around it. But then I'm also thinking about, you know, beef jerky sticks that are made with the cleanest ingredients,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, they're healthy and they're extra protein packed in them so that they're good to take while you're doing your exercise or whatever, right? There's more of a story you can have around that. Or I have a buddy who's got who 3D prints sunglasses. Anybody listening can go to santeyewear.com. These
Mm-hmm.
sunglasses they're amazing. And the craftsmanship in these things and his attention to detail utilizing 3D printing is crazy. These things they're
Mm-hmm.
works of art, right? That's what I'm thinking about e-commerce, right? I'm thinking about those sorts of products, right? So these guys with the
Mm-hmm.
jerky sticks, and I think a lot of those guys, like these guys with the jerky sticks, they start selling them at farmers markets, right?
Mm-hmm.
They kind of do the feed on the street tour. Does that make sense? Or
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so Tom does that with his Sant Eyewear. He's at all the shows or the like farmers markets, or what do you call them? Can't remember what they call those things. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, these guys with the jerky sticks, they got their messaging in line a little bit by selling at conventions or these sorts of things. What they did is they went to golf. They went to literal golf uh, tournaments,
Mm-hmm.
and they started pitching them to the actual golfers. They're like, "Hey, you can eat
Okay.
these jerky sticks while you're
Right.
freaking golfing, right?"
Yeah.
Anyway, so what happened is these guys, as they tell their story, they started speaking on podcasts a few years ago, and they started talking about their beef sticks, and you know, they went on like 100 shows in 3 years or something
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Wow.
Uh-huh. But the next thing you know, via podcasting, because there's 6 main benefits of guest speaking on podcasts,
Mm-hmm.
one of which is who you meet.
Mm-hmm.
Literally who you meet by speaking on the podcast. Like I meet you, Arlen. Great chance you're like, wow, Mischa's got his act together. He can help some of my people by going on a podcast tour. So you'll introduce me to some people, right? So
Yeah.
these guys are guest speaking on podcasts. One of the things that happens when you guest speak on a podcast is the audience will literally go click on your call to action. So you're like, hey man, if you want to know more about my beef sticks, go to beefsticks.com and right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then or you're gonna have networking opportunities, like the host will literally direct you to somebody who needs your product or refer you or what have you. Next thing you know, they get introduced to a Walmart
Mm-hmm.
distributor. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because they're guest speaking on podcasts, and
Yeah.
bam, they now they're in Walmart.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it can definitely, widen your base of exposure for sure.
Thank
Like you
you.
said, for a number of different reasons. And now when we're thinking of this, let's say you're going to go on a podcast guest speaking tour. Just like anything with an e-commerce business, if we're looking at these type of outreach activities, we're kind of looking at it as a as a marketing strategy. Now, if we're looking at this as being a long-term marketing strategy, because obviously these days, there's millions of podcasts out there, so it's millions of opportunities for you to get on, other people's shows and really kind of keep things going, year after year. And so if we're looking at this as a long-term marketing strategy, what do you see and what have you seen as, the potential returns that you can expect from this approach? You've already talked about the connections that you can build. You talked about the direct calls to action. But as far as, I guess you can say systematizing this or being able to track this via metrics, what would be some of the things that you could expect from going on one of these type of tours?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And so again, the benefits of guest speaking on a podcast are you can literally tell the audience, go click on this CTA. So anybody listening, if they're like, oh my gosh, Mischa, I want to do what you do, I want you to teach me, they can go to badzuck.com, BADZUCK.com, join what I do, and I'll coach them up, right? So your call to action. So around that call to action is people are going to join your email list as well. So you can start building your email list. Correct?
Yep.
Awesome. And now you can market, sell, inspire off of that email list. Around that as well is podcasting, going on YouTube's guest blogging. That's the other thing around an influence tour is you can guest write articles. You can do things like that. That content is SEO rich. It's got lasting power, and you're tending to build versus if you go on Facebook or the social media channels, that's very fleeting. Yeah. So we've got that. As I said, the host will recommend you to someone. The host sometimes will use the services themselves. I know you've got this great affiliate software that you use. I know if you're on a guest speaking tour, guarantee you some hosts are going to be like, I need to use your software. Collaboration opportunities. The other thing is you can repurpose the content. So I could take this video, take cool clips, repurpose the content, and I'm going to answer your question here shortly. We've also got branding. So you're going to be seen as the authority in your space. A number 7 bonus is that you're going to be a different person. As a marketer, as an e-commerce seller, if you commit to going on a podcast tour and putting yourself out there like that, in that way consistently, it'll be a transformational process for you. Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
And so how do we track it now? So it's also on your CTAs, you can do bit.ly links and things like that. So if you're telling people to go to specific sites, you can create custom URLs so you can track. It's a little harder on podcasts because it's a lot of maintenance to track all this stuff. But I can tell you that as I go on a guest speaking tour myself, and the more podcasts that I speak on, and I can't speak on enough, I wake up to new leads, to new sales, to new, you know what I mean? I wake up and there's the proof right there. I'm like, where'd that come from?
Right.
And
exactly.
Yeah.
I get that. A lot of it is benefits that you may not necessarily directly see, like after a specific appearance. Like you may not see a boost in sales like immediately, but like you said, it's that awareness that is going to eventually grow over time. And depending on the podcast that you're on, the popularity of them, then that's where it can really start to build.
Yeah,
for sure. As we get ready to wrap things up, I know a lot of people are listening are probably like, okay, Arlen, Mischa, this is awesome. I'm sold. I've already been thinking about getting on podcasts. I know the benefits of it. I see there's so many out there. Now, it's almost like going to a grocery store and going to the cereal aisle. There's so many options. And like I said earlier, there's millions of podcasts at this point that you could possibly get on. So as a person that's now interested, the next question is going to be, okay, how do I find those right podcasts to get on, and what are some strategies for doing that?
Yeah, that's such a another great question. You've got these great questions. Give me 1 second. I have a framework. I've got frameworks for everything, and so I've got my Find Your Perfect Podcast framework, my 5-step framework to easily find more podcasts to speak on than you
Mhm.
know what to do with. And one of the key thoughts around that is think about a podcast audience. We only need a slice of that podcast audience,
Right.
correct?
Mhm.
So we want the Venn diagram of interest to intersect. If
Yeah.
anybody knows what a Venn diagram is, but does that make sense when I
Yeah,
say
yeah,
that?
definitely. Yeah, you don't necessarily need, because obviously with every podcast, there's a particular audience. Not everybody in that audience is going to have the same interests, the same background, same demographics. For your particular product or service, you just need a small snippet of that audience that's going to align with what it is that you're providing. So that makes total sense.
Absolutely. So me talking about guest speaking on podcasts itself, if we use that as the product, you could think about, oh my gosh, I could go onto coaching websites. I could go onto
Yeah,
coaching podcasts, e-commerce podcasts. I have a
yeah,
lot of rich stories about starting over in life, about retiring and then rebirthing into the entrepreneurial space. So I could go on to 50 something podcasts and talk about reinventing yourself.
hmm,
Does that make sense? And so
yes,
if we start getting creative and think about where is a little bit of a slice of our audience, man, their podcasts are all over the place, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
for me personally, mid 50s, I've got a couple of great stories of reinventing myself as a salesman entrepreneur. Man, that's a powerful story to tell to
hmm,
50 something websites, and there's all
yeah,
kinds of them, right?
yeah.
I'm going to take a note on that and get on that niche right now.
Yeah, that's really good, because that gives, I think, the listeners some reassurance that you don't need to find a podcast, and you probably never find it, that's going to check all of your boxes of everything it is that you're trying to connect with, as far as that end customer, because it's not going to happen. There may be a few people in the audience of these different podcasts where it's going to resonate with, they're going to be your ideal customer avatar, so to speak. Yeah, there may be a few, but there may be people that are in that particular audience that resonate with maybe a specific aspect of what it is that you're doing, or a certain service offering, but not everything that you provide, not all of your service offerings. So that's good to know. You don't have to find a show that's going to cover everything, because it's probably not going to be possible.
Exactly. And so the question is, how do you find the podcast? Start with Google. Google is a
Yeah.
great way to go. So I could literally start Googling coaching podcasts, uh, midlife crisis podcasts, uh, speaker podcasts, or how to speak podcasts. There's podcasts that talk about that. There's podcasts that are talk about books and things like that. And so obviously
Mhm.
authors need to go on an influence tour, on a podcast tour. I could literally just go Google marketing.
Mhm.
People, I'm in a good niche of marketing,
Yeah,
right? And so start with the
exactly.
Google. Um, and then what I'll do is, like, I looked at your podcast guest list. I'm
Yep.
like, ooh, Arlen's had some cool people on there on your podcast.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. And so I can start looking those people up and seeing if they have a podcast.
Yep,
So
true.
it's a great way to do that. And so if
Mhm.
you find podcasts that you want to speak on, look at their guest list and hack that guest list
Yeah.
is what I like to say. And then I have a spreadsheet that I use, and I'm constantly, as I'm finding podcasts, I just enter the name of that podcast on that spreadsheet. I've got a name for my tracking spreadsheet. I've got a framework for all this,
Mhm.
but anyway, just know that if you systemize it, it helps the process. So then you go, all right, where the heck do I find the email? Because that's the next thing. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's a thing called an RSS feed. Every podcast has an RSS feed. Most of those RSS feeds have the email embedded in it. So
Yep.
you can go to an RSS feed finder. And I have some favorite RSS feed finders. So I've got what I call the guest speaker challenge tracking template. So I just challenge myself to how many podcasts I want to speak on. And so that's why I call it that. But some
Mm-hmm.
links are where you can find the RSS feed. All you need to know, forget about the techno babble, is that if you find the RSS feed, the email is going to be in there. Okay.
Okay.
So you can go
Okay.
to podcastaddict.com or chartable.com, anybody listening. So as you
Mm-hmm.
start building your lists of podcasts, now you got to find the email. You can go to those tools. They're super easy to use. Click on RSS feed and look in the RSS feed, and the email will pop out at you. So that's one way. Sometimes they're
Mm-hmm.
hidden. So then you go, okay, go to their Facebook page, their business page. Almost always there's an email address there. You can go to
Yep.
YouTube. So most people who have a podcast have a YouTube channel. And if you go to the about info of the YouTube channel, it says, you know, show me the email address, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can do that. So that's all free. You can do that.
Mm-hmm.
There's also tools that you can pay for. So Listen Notes allows you to use some bulk to do some bulk searching. And you end up paying for the email address, a nominal amount, but that's a great way to do it if you have a budget. And then anybody can go to find podcasts fast. Oh my gosh, that's hard to say. Find
Tongue twister. Yeah.
podcastsfast.com. I have a partner that I work with, PitchDB. The guy's name is Ron Story Jr. And I
Mm-hmm.
use this tool all the time. I pay for it. I love it. It's basically a
Mm-hmm.
database of 4 million podcasts with their email addresses. You can send your email pitch right from it. Love this guy. Ron is a genius. His tool is awesome. If anybody signs up, it's an affiliate through
Mm-hmm.
me, they get 30% off.
Okay.
But that basically systemizes a lot of the process. Again, if you have a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of a budget. So
Yeah.
you can go to findpodcastsfast.com and take advantage through that affiliate link. Hopefully, I
Oh,
answered your question.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, you covered a lot of bases as far as free ways, of course, of finding the right podcast to get on. As you see, there's from going to Google, doing your own searches. There's a free resources where you can pull emails from the RSS feeds. And then there's a lot of paid services. So all of the ways in which you can get into it, and there's really no excuse for an entrepreneur to kind of get in there and try to find those shows to get on. And yeah, that definitely answers the question. Thank you for sharing that. And
Yes.
thank you, Mischa, for coming on. This has been an awesome conversation. Because as we know, you mentioned 4 million podcasts in that specific database. Podcasts today are definitely not going anywhere anytime soon. They're only going to continue to grow. There's going to continue to be more out there, and to continually be a good vehicle for e-commerce businesses to expose their businesses to the right customers. And so lastly, before we do let you go, I always like to switch gears just so our audience can get to know you a little bit better. If you don't mind sharing one closing fun fact about yourself that you think we'd be interested to know.
Yeah. So when I was young in my late teens and early 20s, I was a professional snowboarder on the
Okay.
first wave of snowboarding. Yeah. So late
Wow.
80s, early 90s. Yes.
Okay.
And as a matter of fact, I was on the forefront so much that a lot of the ski areas, if any of your audience happens to ski, maybe Jackson
Mhm.
Hole, Wyoming, or Colorado or Utah,
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
a huge amount of those ski areas, I was the first snowboarder on a lot of those ski lifts.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's impressive. Yeah. I do ski myself. I'm actually going to Park City, Utah, this winter, and I ski as well. So yeah, snowboarding, when you think about it, you don't realize that, yeah, it's a fairly new sport. And
Y-
so, yeah, it hasn't been around for that long. And so, yeah, that's some good stuff. So I
Yeah.
know, I'm sure it was probably when you first started doing it, I'm sure it was quite you were probably catching eyes where people are like, what the heck? What is he doing? Is that a skateboard?
Yes,
And,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yes,
So
and
yeah,
lots of great feedback, and then also lots of negative feedback. Anytime
gotcha.
something new comes,
Yeah,
people there's a section that will not be happy about it.
yeah,
So
yeah.
but I loved it. I loved it.
Okay.
Loved the attention, and snowboarding's fun. I'm a skier too. I grew up in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, so I love skiing. I've
Okay.
gravitated back to skiing. I just think
Okay.
skiing is so much fun. So I'm jealous
Yeah,
that you're
that's
going to Park City. That's
yeah, it's awesome. Skiing and snowboarding, it's a great sport for sure. A lot of fun. Well, Mischa, thank you for sharing that. I definitely appreciate that. Lastly, before we do let you go, if you don't mind sharing one of the best ways for our audience to connect with you, if they want to reach out to you, pick your brain anymore about podcasting, marketing, or anything under the sun, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Yeah, so I have a great resource for people if they're like, "Oh yeah, this guest speaking tour sounds amazing, this influence tour." You can go to guestingguide.com. Guestingguide.com. I've got a free downloadable resource. It's got the 10 key points to executing a profitable and successful podcast tour. So a lot of what we talked about is going to be in there, but a bunch more stuff. So you can download it for free there. And then, of course, you can always find me on Facebook. But I'd say the best way to find me is to go to my podcast, tablerushtalkshow.com, tablerushtalkshow.com. And then again, Facebook, Mischa Zvegintzov. You can find me. There's only one of me. There's not many
Gotcha.
Mischa Zvegintzovs out there. So Facebook, if you want to
Gotcha.
send me a DM or anybody wants to DM me, I'm checking Facebook. So if anybody's like, I need to get a hold of this dude, DM me on Facebook.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. We'll definitely be sure to have the link to your podcast and those other resources in the show notes, and definitely encourage people to connect with you on Facebook and other social media platforms. Well, once again, thanks a lot, Mischa, for joining us. This has been an awesome conversation. We really appreciate having you on the E-commerce Marketing Podcast.
Thank you, Arlen.
Thank you for listening to the E-commerce Marketing Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate, review, subscribe, and share it with everyone you know. Are you looking to take your digital marketing to the next level but are tired of weeding through countless YouTube videos with unproven and untrusted marketing strategies? Well, we have the answer for you. The More Sales Every Month online digital marketing course. In this information-packed course, you will learn effective keyword research, link building, content marketing, and much more to attract and convert your site visitors into paying customers. Just go to moresaleseverymonth.com and sign up today for a low one-time fee. In addition to this power-packed course, if you would like to get access to a growing repository of digital marketing articles, PDFs, and ebooks, check out getosi.com/resources and opt in to get full access to our library of priceless marketing information to help you take your digital marketing to the next level.